Kuba, do you see any resemblance from what we're seeing now than what happened in the 2010s?
Not really, no.
Hmm.
There are some through lines that just go with the territory of mass mobilization, people power revolutions. And the 2010s, you can look at that period with the Arab Spring. You can also go back to 1998, the Asian financial crisis, the overthrow of Suharto in Indonesia, um, the Ferdinand Marcos, the elder,
Mm.
because now we have to specify, was also brought down by a people power revolution, nonviolent resistance, large scale mobilization in the streets. Um, and that was generation even before the financial crisis. So I think that conditions in most developing countries have, for the 50 years or more, been likely to trigger these kinds of grievances, whether it was in North Africa or Southeast Asia or the South Asian subcontinent, all over Africa. You had governments, sometimes even entire systems, that were predicated on a promise of national development, of improving standards of living, a promise for the future for young people, that failed to deliver. And instead, as Stefan referenced, you had this viscerally obvious corruption in your face all of the time. You had a class that were supposed to be fostering general welfare, but instead were out for themselves. That was leadership. And that frustrated youth cohort then can be mobilized and channeled towards political change. One reason why the uh, migration to the West is such a problem from many third world countries is precisely because you have young people, large youthful populations, very different demographics than the Western world, that see their opportunities at home frustrated, and you either have to do something drastic here or you can try to go over there. And obviously, for the regimes in question, having a million more um, of a diaspora in Europe sending back remittances is much more attractive than having mobilized an angry street youth.
Stefan, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, someone just said in chat that about the situation recently in Nepal, where I didn't realize until reading about Nepal after the recent protests, is how completely terrible the Nepalese communists were, and not in the sense of like the sense that communists were often bad in the 20th century, where they killed like 1 trillion people or whatever, or so they say.
Mm.
But rather than in a very new and original sense of just the Nepalese Maoists fought like a brutal civil war to get into power, won that war, and then just became completely normal bourgeois politicians. With the only difference between them and the opposition parties is that the communists were atheists while the opposition were Hindu.
Well, that matters a lot for all the thousand different gods that the subcontinent. It's much more inclusive that way than monotheism, but atheism. That's the zero god religion is the most exclusive of them all.
Very true.
What did the 2010s movements, Tahrir, Brasilia, Euromaidan, Korea, achieve structurally, and where did they fail? And what lessons do you think these Gen Z protesters explicitly appear to have taken from those failures?
I mean, I guess Euromaidan was actually the one which was successful in its aim up until 2022. And I guess in some sense, I don't know, can you say Euromaidan was still a success in 2025 in achieving what it set out to do? maybe, because at least in rhetoric, Ukraine has never been more integrated in the West than it ever has before. Ukraine is now seen as like the spirit of the West. But then if we're looking towards places like Egypt and Syria, in some very distant and horrible sense, the revolution in Syria succeeded also in December 2024, but it was long after any progressive part of what was happening in the protests against Assad had been completely emaciated and destroyed by 10 years of terror and war and Islamization. I think Islamization is also an interesting one because of all these recent revolutions, the one I can see that clearly has changed things in the country, apart from replacing the elite, is the revolution in Bangladesh, which has overthrown a previously secular government, and now they're pushing towards actual Islamism, which then has just led to like not quite pogroms, but they're like smashing up churches and stuff.
Jesus. Kuba, did you want to add?
Well, I would say that we could point to Yemen potentially as another success story of the 2010 Arab Spring. Tunisia used to be the one case that liberals were comfortable with because it appeared to produce a stable multi-party democracy, but now that's much more in doubt. However, the Houthi government has been remarkably durable. Indeed, what seems to have taken place is in the 2010 wave of mass mobilization, you either ended up with a government that then got caught up in an awful international military confrontation or failed. Nothing but failures. The Libya, Tunisia, I'm less familiar with the Brazilian case, but
well, you got Bolsonaro out of that.
Exactly. I wouldn't call it a success. And I think that one of the lessons analytically is when you have this breakdown of state authority, whatever your feelings are about the prior state apparatus, then regardless of who mobilized the protests, regardless of who undermined that authority, the groups that are able to capitalize on it and to build their own political structures are the ones that have previously been institutionalized and mobilized. It's very, very difficult to, build the airplane while taxiing on the runway. It's very, very hard to create the institutionalized movement that can take power and execute power, operate in authority, while challenging the authority of the previous state. So in Egypt, it was the Muslim Brotherhood that had previously been organizing. It had institutionalized its membership, created structures and networks that was able to take over. Similarly, the Houthis and the Ukrainian nationalists had structures of their own before the period of political contestation. So that, I'd say, would be one of the big lessons I'd share with the newest wave of Gen Z revolutionaries, right? Pay attention to who had the membership organizations, who had the institutionalized mobilization beforehand, because that's who you're going to be handing the country over to.